Brian Latrell of the Backstreet Boys is suing the Walton County Sheriff's Office, and I'm going to tell you everything. So place your bets now on if you're going to be siding with the Backstreet Boy or the Florida cop. Through his LLC, he is suing the Sheriff's Office to compel them to remove trespassers from his beachfront property. In February of 2023, the Littrell family spent $3.8 million buying a home on the Florida coastline. And so for the last 2.5 years, they've owned this home as well as much of this beach all the way up until the mean high tide line. In Florida, by law, the public has access to anything below the mean high tide line. This is essentially an average of where the high tide gets to. And some states do it differently, but a lot of states follow this rule. Basically, on the wet sand is public access and on the dry sand is private beach. So when the Latrells purchased their home in 2023, they also purchased much of this sand up to the waterline. And they're alleging that they've had a lot of trouble with trespassers in this area, who either do not understand or do not care what is and is not private beach. They say that they put up no trespassing signs, they used umbrellas and chairs and tables to mark the area that was their own private beach, and that beachgoers simply did not care and still wanted to use the dry sand. They say that every single day they are harassed, antagonized, and bullied by people coming onto their property, and they've even had to hire private security, because they also allege that the sheriff's office refuses to do anything about this. They claim that a couple months ago, in May of 2025, an officer came out to their property to confront one of these trespassers, and on body camera, this officer is seen telling them that they are on private property, but that he doesn't believe in private beaches. And allegedly, the officer called it lunacy that he wanted to kick people off the beach. 1 month later, in June of 2025, there was another alleged incident. This time, they alleged that their property manager went to confront a trespasser and showed them documents proving it was private property, and that the trespasser allegedly ripped the paperwork out of the property manager's hand and scattered it to the wind. Latrell and his family called the police 3 times in just over an hour, and they say the third time they called, they were hung up on. In an interview with Fox News, Latrell said, "It's property rights. This is what we're talking about. I bought this place many years ago, 2.5 years, and they obviously know who I am. They're coming after my family. We should be on here talking about the success of Backstreet Boys, but we're talking about people invading my privacy. It's unfortunate." And then his lawyer decides to bring politics into it, saying, "You have these left-leaning people who think that everyone should have nothing and everyone will be happy. These people have to go across the scantily populated public beaches in order to get to Brian's property. This is not just Brian's problem, it's also his neighbor. These people are just here to cause trouble." And then he goes on to imply that they don't believe that Brian Latrell should have what he has, or they don't believe in the American dream, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. You can read it if you want. There are a couple pieces of very important context to all of this, starting with this being his residence and this being a beach access point. So I'm so confused why he thinks that people are traveling all over the place to try to get to him when he's literally like really close to a beach access. These are public access ways that you can find on a map. The next closest one I could find to this was like 50 houses that way, and he's only like 2 houses from the access. And even though Florida does have this rule about private beach being the dry beach and public beach being the wet beach essentially, there are also rules in some places that say that if historically the beach has been used for public access, it will continue to be used that way. And let's just take a look at some of the listing photos really quickly. When they viewed this property in 2023, these are those listing photos. There are plenty of people using the dry sand on the beach behind all of the property. You can see them through the window in the house, all along the beach. These are all from the real estate listing. So I'm a little bit confused because to me it's like moving into New York City and then calling in a noise complaint every time you hear a neighbor take a footstep. I kind of feel like they bought this house and they were like, we're just going to enforce the rules. They'll just have to listen to us once we have the property. The Latrell family ended up filing a trespass authorization form with Walton County, which allows the sheriff to warn, trespass, or prosecute trespassers that remain on the property. And they say that the sheriff made it clear that his office will not attend to the subject property or protect the Latrell family. They say that the reality of the situation here is if the sheriff continues to shirk its duty, a substantial likelihood exists that the property will continue to be damaged as its agents are harassed by trespassers regardless of their efforts to protect the property. They did claim that there was damage to one of the tables that they had put out to mark their property line. And by the way, one thing I find especially confusing about all of this is they say it's happening every single day. So do they expect the sheriff's office to like post someone up at their home? I don't understand what remedy they really think would work here, because they have not made allegations that it's the same people over and over and over again. They're just like, people come to the beach and they sit on our property. And through Brian Latrell's LLC, they are petitioning for a writ of mandamus. Essentially, they want this court to compel the police to do their job. And the sheriff's office has responded, and they're basically like, that actually isn't our job. They say that they have discretionary judgment to make an arrest and enforce the law. In a perfect world, in my opinion, would all rules be black and white and everything is crystal clear and everybody follows the same rules all the time? Yeah. But we live in a world of nuance, and so the police has discretion about when to enforce laws, when to even investigate people. Interestingly, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis just signed a bill kind kind of related to this. In 1974, the Supreme Court of Florida made a ruling about the public's access to beaches. This was about a private owner that wanted to build an observation tower on the beach. And they ended up saying that the general public may continue to use the dry sand area, not just the wet sand, for their usual recreational activities, not because the public has any interest in the land itself, but because of a right gained through custom to use this particular area of the beach as they have without dispute and without interruption for many years. Basically saying that if the public has gone on this beach all of the time since the dawn of Florida, jurisdictions can choose to allow them to continue doing that. In 2018, this was overturned by a House bill in Florida. And then just very recently, like I think in the last month or so, Ron DeSantis signed a bill reinstating it. He says that prior to him becoming governor, that local governments were prohibited from affirming the public's recreational use of the dry sand areas of private beaches unless they first went through a complex and costly judicial process. The law tied the hands of counties and cities trying to protect the rights of residents and visitors to enjoy the same beaches that they had used for generations previously. Now, as the ink dried on this signature, no laws were actually changed about public access to the beach. This bill allows the counties to make those laws now, which they were previously prohibited from doing. By the way, this was not solely done for the purposes of protecting the public access to the beach. I believe a lot of this has to do with beach restoration. I could probably do a whole video on how crazy beach restoration or beach enhancement is. But essentially, a lot of America, the beaches are not natural. They are like sand pumped up from other parts of the ocean and then sprayed onto the beaches. And something about the law in 2018 made it more difficult for them to do these beach restoration projects. Apparently, there's quite a bit of erosion on these Florida beaches that they would like to address. I could also talk a lot about how coastlines are meant to move, and people should not buy property very close to coastline. Erosion is part of the natural process, and okay. That's not what this is about. So are you team Backstreet Boy with the American dream, or are you team Florida Cop and think private beaches are lunacy? Or neither. Or neither. Okay, love you guys. Drink water. Bye.